Other guys reincarnate in other worlds with legendary swords or dragon blood, but what about me? I woke up on a rusty cargo ship in the middle of a dead ocean with 24 screaming women. It's 40 degrees Celsius, we have zero food, zero water, and a blue panel in my field of vision clearly states, affection points, 0, time until severe dehydration, 18 hours. The noise is deafening. 24 girls are panicking on the blisteringly hot deck. I scan them. Some are wearing medical scrubs, others office suits, a few in athletic wear. A diverse pool of skills, currently completely paralyzed by hysteria. I am the only male. In a survival situation, the minority becomes the scapegoat. A girl in a torn designer dress steps forward. Zhao. I recognize the type instantly, wealthy, entitled, used to giving orders. You, she screams, pointing a manicured finger at me. You kidnapped us. Tie him up until he tells us where we are and gives us the water. The crowd shifts. 24 pairs of desperate, angry eyes lock onto me. If this turns physical, I lose. I weigh 70 kilos. A mob of terrified, thirsty women will tear me apart. I don't argue. Arguing wastes calories. My only weapon is the system, but right now, it is entirely useless. It is an affection system. But here is the catch, it does not accept fake feelings, fear, or acting. To generate points, one of these girls has to genuinely feel gratitude, admiration, or affection for me. Right now, they want to throw me overboard. Trying to charm them is mathematically impossible. I need leverage. I turn my back on Zhao and walk toward the rusty hatch leading below deck. Don't let him escape. Zhao yells, but hesitation keeps them on the upper deck. Good. Let them bake in the sun. The lower deck is an oven. I scan the engine room. Dead machinery. But basic physics still works. The temperature difference between the roasting metal hull and the cooler sea below creates condensation. I find a fractured coolant pipe in the darkest corner. Drop by agonizing drop, murky water falls into a rusted groove. I tear off my sleeve, soak it in the puddle, and squeeze the liquid into an empty plastic oil cap I found on the floor. Half a cup. It is dirty, warm, and tastes like rust, but it is wet. I have 0 affection points, AP. The cheapest item in the system store is a basic food ration, and it costs 2 AP. I need a transaction. I climb back up to the glaring sun. Zhao instantly blocks my path, spotting the cap in my hand. What is that? Give it to me. Now. I look at her. If I give it to her, she will think she intimidated me into doing it. 0 genuine gratitude. 0 AP. It would be a catastrophic investment. I walk right past her, ignoring her outraged gasp. I scan the crowd. I need someone broken. Someone who understands the absolute value of this half cup of water. My eyes land on a girl huddled against the iron railing. She has not screamed once. Her lips are cracked, her eyes vacant and exhausted. Lin. I walk over and kneel in front of her. I do not say a word. I just hold out the rusted cap. She flinches, looking from the dirty water to my face. She expects a condition. Drink, I say quietly. She takes it with trembling hands and downs it in one gulp. She coughs violently, but the moisture works. She looks up at me. Not with fear. Not with suspicion. But with pure, unadulterated relief. Target, Lin. Emotion, genuine gratitude. Plus 10 affection points. Total balance, 10 AP. Finally, I open the system interface. 10 AP. A military MRE ration costs 2 AP. 10 minus 2 leaves me with 8. I buy it. A solid, green plastic block materializes in my empty hand out of thin air. The screaming on the deck stops instantly. The silence is heavy. 24 girls freeze, staring at the impossible object in my hand. Zhao's mouth falls open. I rip the package open. The smell of processed beef hits the salty air. Listen to me, I say, my voice carrying over the dead wind. I didn't bring you here. But I am the only reason you won't starve to death. I checked the system again. A ship is a metal coffin. We have no tools and no space. We need land. The core module I need is glowing in the interface. Module 1, Basic Island Summon. Cost, 8 AP. Buy it, I mentally command. Balance, 0 AP. The ocean trembles. It is not a wave. It is a violent earthquake coming from the abyss. The girls scream again, clinging to the rails as the massive cargo ship violently rocks. 100 meters off our port side, the black water boils. Jagged gray rocks tear through the surface, followed by thick, unnatural green vines and pale trees. A massive chunk of land forces its way out of the sea, sending a tidal wave crashing against our rusted hull. The ship groans, tilts horribly, and slams into the newly formed shore. Metal screeches against stone. We are grounded. I wipe the salt water from my eyes. We have land. But looking at the dark, dense, towering jungle of the island in front of us, I know one thing. Whatever is hiding in those trees is going to cost a lot more than 10 points to survive. The grinding of metal against stone finally stopped. The ship was tilted at a 15-degree angle, wedged firmly into the rocky shoreline of the new island. I stood on the deck, gripping the rusted railing. This was no tropical paradise. The island was brutal. Jagged, dark obsidian rocks pierced the coastline like broken teeth. Beyond them, a dense jungle of pale, ash-colored trees with unnaturally thick, fleshy leaves loomed in the heat. The 24 women behind me were dead silent. The shock of an island violently rising from the ocean had temporarily overridden their panic. But shock doesn't burn calories. Fear does. And soon, they would be hungry again. I opened the system interface's balance, 0 AP. I did the math. A basic military ration costs 2 AP. To feed 25 people, I need 50 AP a day. Just to survive. Right now, I am completely bankrupt. If I don't find a new income source, we all starve by tomorrow. A small notification blinked in the corner of my vision. Target, Lin. Emotion, lingering gratitude. Passive income generated, plus 1 AP per hour. I glanced back. Lin was sitting near the hatch, clutching the empty plastic cap I had given her. She was watching me, trusting me. It was a slow drip of points, but it was a start. Don't just stand there. Zhao's voice shattered the silence. She had recovered her nerve, though her designer dress was now stained with rust and salt. We hit land. Go down there and find us a hotel, or a phone, or food. You summoned this dirt pile, didn't you? A few of the other girls murmured in agreement. Some were looking at the strange fleshy leaves of the jungle. A girl with glasses, she looked like a biology student, squinted at the trees. Those leaves, they look succulent. Like aloe. They might contain water. Then go pick them, Zhao ordered her. Nobody moves, I said, my voice cutting through the humid air. I turned to face them. This isn't a resort. We don't know the ecosystem. We don't know the predators. Before Zhao could argue, a massive shadow fell over the edge of the jungle. The pale trees snapped like dry twigs. The heavy thud of footsteps vibrated through the steel hull of our grounded ship. 3 figures emerged from the tree line. They were humanoid, but that was where the similarities ended. They stood over 3 meters tall. Their skin was the color of bruised granite, thick and hairless. Muscles corded like steel cables under their flesh. They wore ragged loincloths made from the skins of massive beasts, and in their hands, they gripped crude axes made of boulders lashed to tree trunks giants. The silence on the deck shattered. A collective, piercing scream erupted from the women. Panic exploded. Girls scrambled backward, tripping over each other, trying to hide behind rusted ventilation shafts and cargo containers. A red warning flashed across my vision. Warning: high concentration of fear detected in 23 subjects. AP generation from these subjects is blocked. Fear overrides affection. Damn it. Fear was my enemy. If they were terrified, they couldn't generate points. I had to stop this panic right now. The leading giant tilted his massive head, listening to the screams. He raised his stone axe and let out a guttural, deafening roar that rattled the ship's windows. He took a heavy step toward the hull. One swing of that axe could cave in the rusted side of the ship. "Stay behind me!" I yelled, moving to the edge of the broken ramp that led down to the rocks. I weighed 70 kilograms. I had no weapons, no armor, and no physical strength to fight a 3-meter monster. But I had a brain, and they had Stone Age technology. I checked my balance. 3 hours had passed since the island rose. Balance, 3 AP. I opened the system store. I needed a tactical advantage, something that manipulated primitive psychology. I scrolled past the weapons I couldn't afford and found the utility section. Purchase: magnesium flash grenade, civilian grade. Cost: 2 AP. Purchase: plastic lighter. Cost: 1 AP. Confirm, I muttered. Balance: 0 AP. A small cylindrical canister and a cheap red lighter dropped into my pockets. I walked down the tilted steel ramp, stepping onto the dark rocks. The heat of the island baked my shoes. I stood between the massive metal ship and the 3 advancing giants. The leader stopped. He looked down at me, his deep-set black eyes filled with primitive confusion. I was tiny to him. A bug. He sneered, raised his massive stone axe, and prepared to crush me. "Close your eyes." I screamed at the ship behind me. I pulled the pin on the magnesium grenade and tossed it directly at the giant's thick bare feet. I immediately clamped my hands over my eyes and turned my head. A blinding, agonizingly bright flash of white light erupted on the shore. It was the brilliance of a miniature sun. The giant roared, not in anger, but in sheer, unadulterated pain. The sound of a heavy stone axe hitting the rocks echoed through the air. I opened my eyes. All 3 giants were stumbling backward, clutching their faces, completely blinded by the modern chemical flash. Now for the second phase. Magic. I quickly picked up a dry, pale branch that had snapped off from the jungle's edge. I pulled the red lighter from my pocket and flicked it. The small flame ignited. I held it to the dry leaves of the branch. They caught fire instantly, burning with a bright orange flame. The giant leader rubbed his tearing eyes, his vision slowly clearing. The first thing he saw was me, the tiny, weak creature, standing perfectly still, holding fire in my bare hand without getting burned. To a primitive mind, fire is life. Controlling fire out of thin air is godhood. The giant stared at the lighter, then at the burning branch, then at my calm face. He didn't know it was plastic and butane. He only saw absolute control over the elements. He slowly lowered his hands. He looked at the other 2 giants, who were still blinking away the blindness. He grunted something harsh and guttural. Slowly, the 3-meter-tall monster dropped to one knee on the jagged rocks, bowing his head. The other 2 followed. They didn't attack. But they also didn't leave. They sat cross-legged on the shore, placing their stone axes on the ground in front of them, effectively blocking the only path into the jungle. It was a siege. We were safe for now, but we were trapped. I blew out the burning branch and turned back to the ship. 24 women were staring at me over the railing. Their mouths were slightly open. The panic was gone, replaced by absolute shock. They had just watched me bring 3 monsters to their knees using nothing but light and a small flame. A notification chimed in my head, target, Lin. Emotion, deep awe and absolute trust. Passive AP generation increased to 3 AP per hour. Target, 4 medical students. Emotion, professional respect for crisis management. Plus 20 AP. Target, 3 engineers. Emotion, curiosity and relief. Plus 15 AP. Total balance, 35 AP. I allowed myself a small smirk. The economy was recovering. I walked back up the metal ramp onto the deck. Zhao was staring at me, her arrogant mask completely cracked. What are you?" she whispered. "I am the guy keeping you alive," I said coldly, looking at the entire group. "The monsters outside are primitive, but they aren't stupid. We have no food, no water, and we are trapped on this boat. If you want to survive the night, playtime is over." I pointed at the girl with the glasses who had spoken earlier. You're a biology student?" "Why yes," she stammered. "My name is Chen." "Good, Chen. You're in charge of the flora. I want you to figure out if those fleshy leaves are toxic without leaving the ship." I turned to the others. "Who here has medical training?" 4 girls tentatively raised their hands. "You're the medics. Raid the ship's infirmary. Gather every bandage, pill, and drop of iodine you can find." I then looked at a group of girls wearing practical sneakers and jeans. "Any engineers or architects?" 3 girls stepped forward, looking nervous but focused. "You're my mechanics. This ship is dead, but it's full of metal, pipes, and cables. Find me anything we can use as a weapon or a tool. We need spears, we need ropes, and we need a defensive perimeter." I finally looked at Zhao. She flinched under my gaze. "And you," I said to her. "Since you like giving orders, you can be in charge of inventory. Count every single scrap of food and drop of water on this ship. Lie to me about a single cracker, and you will be the first one I throw off this boat." No one argued. The fear of the giants outside, combined with the impossible things they had just seen me do, had established a new hierarchy. I checked my system panel. 35 AP. It wasn't enough to buy a translator module yet, but it was enough to buy a few basic tools for my new workforce. I didn't have a legendary sword or dragon blood. But I had 24 desperate, skilled women, a system that ran on their trust, and an island to conquer. It was time to build a base. The next 4 hours turned the rusted cargo ship into a functioning, if desperate, labor camp. I stood on the upper deck, watching the 24 women work. Panic had been replaced by a frantic need to survive. Lin approached me. She had wiped the grime off her face and tied her hair back. She wasn't shaking anymore. "Li Hong," she said, holding a clipboard she had salvaged from the captain's cabin. "The engineers managed to detach 6 steel pipes from the broken boiler. They used the ship's grinding wheel to sharpen the tips. We have 6 crude spears." The biology team, led by Chen, tested the fleshy leaves from the jungle edge. They are highly bitter, slightly toxic if eaten raw, but boiling them neutralizes the poison. They yield a thick, starchy paste. I nodded. "Good. What about our water?" The medical team set up a condensation trap using plastic tarps and the remaining engine coolant pipes. It will generate about 3 liters a day. "But food?" Lin hesitated. 1 military ration and a bucket of boiled leaf paste won't sustain 25 people for more than 2 days. People are already getting weak. She was right. I opened my system interface. Passive AP generation, plus 12 AP. Total balance, 47 AP. The trust from the engineers, the respect from the medics, and Lin's steady gratitude were trickling in. But a single nutrient block cost 2 AP. Buying enough to feed everyone would wipe me out instantly, leaving 0 capital for upgrades. I couldn't run a welfare state. I needed a permanent food source. Before I could formulate a plan, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Zhao. She had managed to clean her designer dress, though it was still ruined. She walked up to me, her posture entirely different from the screaming brat of the morning. Her shoulders were relaxed, her eyes wide and soft. She stopped uncomfortably close, placing a hand gently on my chest. "Li Hong," she whispered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You've worked so hard today. You saved us from those monsters." I was so scared earlier, I didn't know what I was saying. But seeing you take charge, it made me feel so safe. I think I really understand you now. She leaned in, her lips parting slightly, offering a clear, unmistakable invitation. "Maybe you and I could share that military ration? Just the two of us. I can be very grateful." I didn't move. I just looked at the blue holographic panel hovering right next to her head. Target, Zhao. Emotion, deceit, manipulation, hidden contempt. AP generated, 0. The system was absolute. It couldn't be hacked by cheap acting. I grabbed her wrist, peeled her hand off my chest, and dropped it like it was infected. 0, I said coldly. Zhao blinked, her seductive smile faltering. "What?" 0, I repeated, stepping back. "That is the exact amount of genuine gratitude you have for me. You don't feel safe. You feel hungry. You think you can use your body to secure a meal ticket while doing absolutely none of the heavy lifting." Her face went pale, then flushed with violent red. Her mask shattered completely. "You arrogant bastard. You think you're a king because you have a lighter and some parlor tricks? We are starving. I am not eating toxic leaves while you hoard real food." "You're right," I said evenly. "You aren't eating the leaves. You aren't eating anything." Lin, cut Zhao's ration to 0 for the next 24 hours. She doesn't eat until she contributes. Lin nodded immediately, writing it down on her clipboard. Zhao screamed in frustration. "Fine. Starve me. See how long your little dictatorship lasts." She spun around and stormed off toward the lower cabins. Within minutes, I watched as she and 3 of her closest friends, girls who had spent the last 4 hours complaining instead of working, grabbed the bucket of unboiled, toxic leaves and locked themselves in the crew quarters. "Should we stop them?" Lin asked, looking worried. "Those leaves will make them sick." "Let them," I said. "A base cannot function with parasites. They will learn the cost of rebellion by tomorrow morning." I turned my attention back to the real problem. The 3 giants were still sitting on the rocky shore, their stone axes resting on their laps. They were guarding the jungle. Beyond them lay a massive, uncharted ecosystem filled with calories. "Lin, bring me one of the sharpened steel pipes the engineers made," I ordered. She ran down to the hold and returned with a heavy, meter-long steel pipe. The tip had been ground down to a brutal, shining point. It was heavy, perfectly balanced, and infinitely more durable than the brittle stone weapons the giants carried. I checked my balance again. 47 AP. I opened the system store and navigated to the communication modules. Purchase, Universal Translator, Local Primitive Dialect. Cost, 40 AP. It was a massive investment. It would leave me nearly bankrupt. But without communication, I couldn't manipulate the giants. "Buy it," I commanded. Balance, 7 AP. Module activated. Language algorithms downloaded. A sharp headache spiked behind my eyes for a second as unfamiliar, guttural syllables etched themselves into my brain. I grabbed the steel spear and walked down the metal ramp, stepping onto the baking rocks. The 3 giants stood up immediately, their massive frames casting long shadows over me. The leader gripped his stone axe, eyeing me warily. He still remembered the blinding flash of the grenade and the fire from my hand. I stopped 5 meters away from him. I planted the blunt end of the steel pipe onto the rock and looked up. "I bring an offer," I said. To my own ears, I spoke English. But from the giant's wide eyes, I knew he heard perfect, flawless giant speak. The leader grunted, his voice sounding like two boulders grinding together. "Firemaker speaks the tongue of the earth. What offer?" "Your weapons are weak," I said, pointing at his crude stone axe. "Stone chips. Stone breaks against the armor of the beasts in the jungle. I have metal." I tossed the sharpened steel pipe onto the ground between us. The metal clanged sharply against the rocks. The giant leader hesitated, then stepped forward and picked it up. His massive, calloused hand wrapped around the steel. He swung it once. The air whistled. He struck the tip against a nearby obsidian boulder. The stone chipped. The steel spear remained perfectly intact, shining in the sun. His black eyes widened. To a Stone Age culture, forged steel was a technological miracle. "Weapon of the gods," he rumbled, running a thick finger over the sharpened edge. He looked down at me. "What does the firemaker want?" "Food," I answered simply. "Fresh meat. Not leaves. Not scraps. In exchange for this weapon, you will bring my people enough meat to eat tonight. If you agree, I will make more weapons for your tribe." The leader looked at the two giants behind him. They nodded eagerly, staring at the steel pipe with undisguised greed. "We accept the trade," the leader growled. "The Ironbacks are hunting near the river. We will kill one. We return before the sun dies." They turned and vanished into the dense, pale jungle, taking the spear with them. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders. The gamble had paid off. Technology and trade always beat brute force. I walked back up to the ship. 4 hours later, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a bruised purple, a massive thud shook the rocks. The giants had returned. They threw the carcass of a creature onto the beach. It looked like a boar, but it was the size of a small car, covered in thick, dark scales. Its throat had been perfectly pierced by the steel spear. The leader slammed a massive chunk of raw, bloody meat onto the deck of our ship. It weighed at least 40 kilos. "The trade is honored, firemaker," the giant grunted, clutching the steel spear tightly before retreating to the tree line to make their own camp. The girls on the deck stared at the mountain of fresh meat in absolute silence. "Medical team, check it for parasites," I ordered, breaking the silence. "Engineers, start a fire using the dry wood from the shore. Culinary team, get out your knives. We eat tonight." An hour later, the smell of roasting pork fat filled the salty night air. The 20 loyal girls sat around a roaring fire on the metal deck, tearing into chunks of hot, dripping meat. Laughter and tears of relief echoed through the night. They were full. They were safe. And they knew exactly who had provided it. I sat on a crate, eating a roasted skewer Lynn had prepared for me. I opened my system interface. Target, Lynn. Emotion, absolute devotion. Plus 50 AP. Target, 3 engineers. Emotion, extreme pride and gratitude. Plus 45 AP. Target, 16 workers/medics. Emotion, deep respect and relief. Plus 120 AP. Total balance, 222 AP. My capital had exploded. The economy was officially booming. From the dark lower cabins, I heard the sound of retching. Zhao and her 3 mutineers were violently sick, throwing up the toxic, unboiled leaves they had stolen. They were starving, sick, and sitting in the dark, while the rest of the ship feasted under the stars. "Should I take them some water?" Lynn asked quietly, sitting next to me. "Yes," I said. "But no meat. The rules of the base are absolute. Tomorrow, they will scrub the decks and clean the latrines. Only then do they eat." I looked out into the dark jungle. We had survived day 1. We had a food source, a workforce, and capital. But the giants had mentioned ironbacks. If a wild boar on this island was the size of a car and armored in scales, we were going to need a lot more than 6 steel pipes to survive the week. The sun rose over the pale, ash-colored jungle, casting long, jagged shadows across the deck of the rust bucket. That was the name I'd given the ship. It wasn't just a vessel anymore, it was the foundation of our civilization. I stood on the bridge, staring at the translucent blue screen in my vision. Current status, Li Hong, affection points, AP 222, population, 25 humans, 3 giant allies, territory, grounded cargo ship, 50 coastal perimeter, daily income, 100 AP, stabilizing. 222 points. In the beginning, I was fighting for a single cup of water. Now, I had capital. But in a strategy game, hoarding capital is a death sentence. You have to reinvest. If you aren't growing, you're dying. I stepped out onto the deck for the morning briefing. The girls were already gathered. They looked different today. The panic was gone. Their faces were sunburnt, their clothes were stained with grease and salt, but their eyes were focused. They weren't waiting to be saved anymore. They were waiting for orders. "Morning report," I said, my voice echoing off the steel hull. Lynn stepped forward, tapping her clipboard. "Water traps are full. We have 6 liters of drinkable condensation. The kitchen team has processed the remaining boar meat from yesterday. We have enough for 2 more meals, but the heat is an issue. Without refrigeration, the meat will spoil by evening. We need a way to preserve it." "Noted," I said. "What about the engineering front?" Sarah, a tall girl with grease-smudged cheeks and a fierce gaze, one of the 3 engineers, stepped up. "We've stripped the interior cabling from the lower decks. We have 50 meters of high-tensile steel wire. We also found a set of heavy-duty manual winches in the storage locker. If we can anchor them to the rocks, we can move heavy loads. But we lack proper tools. We're sharpening steel pipes by hand, Li Hong. It's slow, and the edges don't hold." I looked at my 222 AP. Time to spend. I opened the system store and navigated to the Industrial and Crafting tab. Purchase, Professional Metalworking Tool Set, Heavy Duty. Cost, 60 AP. Purchase, Portable Smoking and Curing Kiln, Schematic Plus Components. Cost, 40 AP. Purchase, 10x Industrial Grade Pulley Blocks. Cost, 30 AP. Total spent, 130 AP. Remaining balance, 92 AP. A heavy wooden crate and several metal components materialized on the deck. The girls gasped. They'd seen me conjure a lighter and a grenade, but this was a whole workshop. "Sarah, take the tools. I want those spears reinforced with crossguards so the beasts can't slide down the shaft after being impaled," I commanded. "Lynn, take the kiln components. Set up a smokehouse on the shore. Use the bitter wood from the jungle. The biology team says the smoke is a natural preservative and insect repellent. What about us?" I turned. It was Zhao. She was pale, her eyes sunken from a night of sickness and hunger, but she was standing straight. Behind her stood the 3 girls who had mutinied with her. They were holding brooms and buckets made from halved oil drums. "You finished cleaning the lower decks?" I asked. "Every inch," Zhao said, her voice raspy. "We scrubbed the rust until our hands bled. We threw the toxic leaves overboard. We're ready to work, Li Hong. Please. We're hungry." I looked at her. The system didn't lie. Target, Zhao. Emotion, submission, desperation, genuine regret. AP generated, +5. "Lynn, give them half rations of the boar meat," I said. "After they eat, they are under your command. They carry the wood. They haul the water. They are the heavy lifting squad until I decide otherwise. Zhao didn't argue. She just nodded, a single tear of relief tracking through the dust on her face. But the peace was short-lived. A low, rhythmic thumping started from the beach. I walked to the railing. The three giants were back. But they weren't carrying meat. Two of them were supporting the leader. His granite-colored skin was sliced open in 3 deep gashes across his chest. The wounds were jagged and caked with dried black blood. The leader collapsed onto the rocks, breathing heavily. He looked up at me on the deck. "Firemaker," he rumbled, his voice weak. "The ironback, too strong. The steel stick you gave us, it bit deep, but the beast did not fall. It broke our line. We had to flee." The girls on the deck went cold. These giants were 3 meters of pure muscle, and they'd been mauled. "Medics! To the ramp! Now!" I yelled. The 4 medical students grabbed their salvaged kits. I spent another 15 AP on medical-grade antiseptic and suture kit from the system. Under my direction, the girls descended the ramp. It was a surreal sight, tiny humans stitching up a 3-meter titan. But as the antiseptic stung the giant's wounds, his breathing stabilized. He looked at the girls with a new kind of respect. Target, giant tribe. Emotion, gratefulness and fear of medicine magic. Plus 30 AP. I knelt by the giant leader's head. "Tell me about the ironback. Why didn't the steel kill it?" "The scales," the giant growled. "They overlap like the roof of a cave. On the back and sides, the steel stick just slides off. You must hit the throat or the belly. But the beast is fast. It charges like a falling mountain. We cannot get close enough to strike the soft spots without being crushed." I looked at the jungle. If we couldn't kill the ironbacks, the giants would stop hunting for us. If they stopped hunting, the base would starve. And eventually, those car-sized boars would find our ship. Strategy, I whispered to myself. We don't fight a tank with a knife. We build a trap. I called Sarah and the engineering team over. I laid out the map of the coastline. "There's a narrow rocky pass 50 meters from the ship," I said, pointing. "The giants say the ironbacks use the trail to reach the salt licks by the water. The pass is only 4 meters wide. High obsidian walls on both sides." A choke point, Sarah realized, her eyes lighting up. "Exactly. Sarah, I want the steel winches anchored to the rocks at the top of those walls. We're going to use the pulleys and the steel wire. We're not going to stab the beast. We're going to trip it. But it's huge, Li Hong. Even steel wire might snap if it's at full gallop." "Not if we use the ship's weight," I replied. "We'll run the main cable from the pass back to the ship's heavy cargo winch. When I give the signal, you engage the gears. The wire will snap taut with the force of a 10-ton engine. It'll shear the beast's legs off or flip it onto its back." "And how do we get it into the pass?" Lin asked. I opened the system store. Tactical lures and chemicals. Purchase, concentrated pheromone bait, ironback alpha. Cost, 30 AP. We don't wait for it. We invite it, I said, holding up a small glass vial filled with a pungent, musk-colored liquid. Current balance, 77 AP. The next 6 hours were a frenzy of construction. It was the first time all 24 girls worked in perfect unison. The engineering team and the heavy lifting squad, led by a surprisingly hard-working Zhao, hauled the massive steel cables into position. They drilled anchors into the obsidian walls using the new toolset. The medics prepared more sutures and bandages, anticipating a fight. The biology team, led by Chen, prepared jars of the bitter paste to coat the giant's spears, hoping the toxin would act as a paralytic if they got a hit in. By mid-afternoon, the trap was set. A high-tensile steel cable lay buried under a thin layer of sand in the middle of the rocky pass. It was connected to a series of pulley blocks that led all the way back to the rust bucket. On the ship, Sarah stood by the heavy cargo winch, her hand on the lever. The three giants stood on top of the obsidian cliffs, hidden by the pale foliage. They held their steel spears, waiting. I stood in the center of the pass. I opened the vial of pheromones and poured it onto a pile of dry brush. The smell was overwhelming, musky, aggressive, and ancient. "Everyone, back to the ship," I ordered. I climbed up the ramp and stood on the deck, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had a binoculars in one hand and the winch signal flare in the other. 10 minutes passed. The jungle was silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Then, we heard it. Crack! A tree snapped like a toothpick. Then another. A low, guttural snort echoed through the canyon, followed by the sound of heavy, armored plates grinding together. The ironback emerged from the tree line. The giants hadn't exaggerated. It was a nightmare of evolution. It was 4 meters long, covered in thick, overlapping black scales that looked like hammered iron. 2 massive, curved tusks protruded from its snout, caked in dried mud and blood. Its eyes were small, red, and filled with a prehistoric rage. It smelled the pheromones. It didn't hesitate. It let out a roar that sounded like a steam engine exploding and charged. The ground shook. It was a living tank, moving at 40 kilometers an hour directly into the narrow pass. "Wait," I whispered, watching through the binoculars. "Wait." The beast entered the choke point. Its massive body filled the space between the obsidian walls. It reached the center, where the hidden cable lay. "Now!" I screamed, firing the flare into the air. On the ship, Sarah slammed the winch lever into gear. The rusted engine of the cargo winch screamed as it took the strain. The steel cable hidden under the sand snapped upward with a sound like a gunshot. It caught the ironback directly under its front knees. The physics was brutal. The beast's momentum carried its 4-ton body forward, but its legs were suddenly anchored to a grounded cargo ship. The ironback didn't just trip. It flipped. The massive creature did a complete somersault in the air, its armored back slamming into the rocky ground with a bone-shattering thud. The obsidian walls cracked from the impact. The beast lay on its back, its soft, unarmored belly exposed to the sky, its legs kicking uselessly in the air. "Strike!" I yelled. The three giants leaped from the cliffs. They didn't use stones. They used the steel-reinforced spears we had crafted. They plunged the spears into the beast's soft underbelly. The ironback let out a final, haunting shriek before the giant's weight drove the steel through its heart. Silence returned to the coast. The giants looked at the dead monster, then at the steel cable, and then up at me on the ship. They raised their bloodied spears and let out a roar of triumph that was echoed by the 24 women on the deck. Mission accomplished, tactical hunt. Rewards, 4,000 kilograms high-quality meat, 200 kilograms armored scales, 50 kilograms high-density bone. Target, 24 women. Emotion, absolute unity and fanatical belief in the leader. Plus 300 AP. Target, giant tribe. Emotion, worship. Plus 150 AP. Total balance, 527 AP. The economy hadn't just boomed. It had reached escape velocity. "Get down there!" I shouted, the adrenaline still coursing through me. "Shen, I want those scales harvested carefully, that's our new armor." "Sarah, we're going to use the ironback's bones to reinforce the ship's hull." "Lin, start the smokehouse. We're going to have enough food to last a month." The next few days were a blur of base building in its purest form. The smokehouse, we processed the entire ironback. The meat was cured and hung in the smokehouse. We now had a stable, long-term food supply. The tannery, the biology team discovered that the bitter leaf paste, when mixed with the boar's fat, could soften the scales. The engineers started sewing the scales onto thick leather hides. We were no longer defenseless, we were building the first scale armor units. The fortification, we used the winches to drag massive obsidian boulders around the ship's base, creating a defensive wall. The rust bucket was becoming a land fortress. The water system, I spent 100 AP on a solar desalination kit. We finally had a constant supply of pure water, no longer relying on condensation. By the end of the week, the ship looked unrecognizable. Smokehouses lined the shore, a stone wall protected our perimeter, and every girl was wearing a vest of black, shimmering scales. We had moved from survival to colonization. I sat on the bridge at night, looking at the firelit camp below. The girls were laughing, the giants were sharing a meal with them, and for the first time, we felt like we owned this island. I opened the system. Current level 1, requirement for level 2, 1000 AP in total loyalty of all subjects. I looked at my balance, 527 AP. I was halfway there. But as I looked at the dark horizon, I remembered the ironbacks. They were just the local fauna. What happened when the system decided to throw something intelligent at us? I didn't have to wait long for an answer. The next morning, Chen ran onto the bridge, her face pale. Li Hong. The giants, they've found something on the north side of the island. It's not a beast. I followed her to the railing. One of the younger giants was holding something in his hand. It was a piece of wood, but it wasn't a branch. It was a carved, painted arrow, black feathers, a obsidian tip, and a strange symbol of a coiled serpent. It was stuck in a tree, the giant rumbled. Fresh. Someone is watching us. I took the arrow. The wood was perfectly balanced. This wasn't primitive. This was craftsmanship. Sarah. Zhao. Lin. I barked. Double the watches. I want the scale armor finished by sundown. We aren't alone on this island anymore. The honeymoon phase was over. We had built a base. Now, we had to defend it. Current AP, 527, new threat detected, unknown sentient faction. Strategic pillar check, economy, stable, tactics, proven, development, advanced, . The first island had given us a home. But the second island, the one the system was already preparing to summon, was clearly not going to be empty. I looked at Zhao, who was now expertly sharpening a scale-tipped spear. She caught my eye and nodded, a look of grim determination on her face. We're ready, Li Hong, she said. I looked at the arrow in my hand. We better be. The arrow with the serpent symbol sat on my desk, the captain's old chart table. It was a silent promise of war. But as it turned out, the first real threat wasn't going to come from the jungle. It was coming from the system itself. I was mid-calculation, trying to figure out if I could afford a basic perimeter alarm, when the blue interface suddenly turned blood red. A high-pitched, digital screech echoed directly into my brain. Warning, system corruption detected. Source, residual negative miasma, subject, Zhao. Protocol, penalty phase activated. My heart skipped a beat. Zhao. She had been working hard. She had been eating the same rations as everyone else. I looked through the window at her. She was hauling water, her face set in a grim mask of effort. Then I understood. The system didn't just track current actions, it tracked the energy left behind. Zhao's weeks of concentrated hatred, envy, and malice during the first days on the ship hadn't just vanished. It had festered in the dark corners of the lower decks, and now the system was cleaning it. Li Hong. Look at the water. Lin's scream pierced the air. I ran to the railing. The sea around the rust bucket was boiling. But it wasn't bubbles. It was a black, oily sludge rising from the depths. From that sludge, thousands of creatures began to crawl onto the hull. They were shadow crabs. About the size of a dinner plate, they looked like they were made of liquid obsidian and smoke. They didn't have shells, they had shifting, semi-transparent carapaces. And they made a sound like 1,000 scissors snipping at once. Threat: shadow parasites. Ability: matter consumption. They feed on metal and flesh. Special: ethereal body. Physical attacks are 90% less effective. Sarah. Defend the hull. I roared. The engineering team and the giants moved instantly. A giant swung his massive steel-tipped spear at a cluster of crabs. The spear passed right through them, hitting the metal hull with a useless clang. The crabs didn't even flinch. They swarmed over the giant's feet. He let out a roar of pain as his thick skin began to smoke and dissolve where the shadows touched him. Back! Everyone back to the upper deck! I yelled. They eat metal. They're dissolving the ship. I wasn't exaggerating. Where the crabs crawled, the rust and iron of the rust bucket vanished, leaving jagged, empty holes. They were eating our home from the bottom up. Current AP, 527. I opened the store, my fingers flying through the menus. I needed an area of effect defense, and I needed it 5 minutes ago. Purchase, Aegis Energy Dome, Tier 1 to 30 minutes. Cost, 400 AP. Purchase, Holy Purification Dust, Industrial Grade. Cost, 100 AP. Total spent, 500 AP. Remaining balance, 27 AP. Confirm. Deploy. A shimmering gold barrier erupted from the center of the deck, expanding outward until it covered the upper half of the ship. The shadow crabs that were already on the deck hit the barrier and evaporated into foul-smelling steam. 23 girls and the 3 giants huddled inside the golden dome. We were safe, for now. But below the dome, the crabs were still devouring the hull. I could hear the ship groaning as its structural integrity failed. Is everyone here? I gasped, looking around at the terrified faces. Lin checked her clipboard, her hands shaking. 20, 21, 22. Li Hong. We're missing 2. Zhao and one of the medics went to the lower galley to bring up the last of the smoke meat. The penalty phase source was Jill. And now she was trapped in the very place the corruption was strongest. The dome won't move, Sarah shouted over the sound of clicking crabs. If we leave it, we die. If we stay, the ship sinks. I looked at the 27 AP left on my balance. I couldn't buy another dome. I couldn't buy a teleport. I grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and ripped the top off. I dumped the bag of holy purification dust I had just bought into the tank. It was a glowing, white powder that smelled like ozone and incense. Stay inside the dome. I commanded. If the ship starts to tilt, tie yourselves to the heavy cargo winches. You're going down there? Lin grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. Li Hong, you'll be eaten in seconds. The system wants to clean the corruption, I said, gritting my teeth. If I don't save the source, the penalty won't end. It'll just keep spawning until we're all dead. I stepped out of the golden dome. The heat was incredible. The air outside the dome was thick with the smell of burning metal. I sprinted toward the hatch, shaking the extinguisher. As soon as I hit the lower deck, the clicking intensified. Thousands of red, glowing eyes tracked me in the darkness. The floor was literally moving, a carpet of shadow crabs. I squeezed the trigger. A cloud of holy dust sprayed out. The effect was instantaneous. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a chemical reaction. The shadows were negative energy. The dust was pure positive essence. When they touched, the crabs exploded in flashes of white light. I cleared a path, sprinting toward the galley. Zhao! Get out here! I heard a scream from behind a heavy steel door. I kicked it open. The room was swarming. The medic was unconscious on the floor, her leg covered in shadow burns. Zhao was standing on a table, swinging a heavy iron pot like a madwoman. She was crying, her face twisted in a mixture of terror and absolute self-loathing. "Leave me," she screamed when she saw me. "It's my fault. The system said it. I'm the one who hated everyone. Just take her and go." The crabs were climbing the table legs. They were inches from her feet. "Shut up and jump," I roared. I sprayed a massive arc of holy dust around the table, creating a temporary circle of white light. Zhao stared at me for a heartbeat. She saw the guy she had tried to manipulate, the guy she had cursed, the guy she had tried to steal from, risking his life in a dissolving ship to save the source of the problem. Something inside her snapped. The last shard of her old, arrogant self shattered into a million pieces. Target, Zhao. Emotion, absolute soul-level remorse. Transformation detected. She grabbed the unconscious medic and jumped. I caught them both, nearly buckling under the weight. I sprayed the last of the dust at the ceiling, creating a falling curtain of white light that held the shadows back for a few seconds. Run! We scrambled up the stairs. The metal steps were literally crumbling under our boots. We dived into the Golden Dome just as the lower deck collapsed into the sea with a deafening roar. The rust bucket shuddered. The entire stern of the ship was gone, eaten away. We were now resting on a stump of twisted, glowing metal. But the red screen in my vision suddenly turned white. Penalty phase concluded. Reason, source of negative miasma, has undergone total emotional transmutation. Outside the dome, the black sludge in the ocean vanished. The shadow crabs evaporated into nothingness. The sun broke through the smoky clouds. I collapsed onto the deck, gasping for air. My lungs burned from the dust and smoke. Zhao was on her knees next to me. She wasn't looking at the ship or the sea. She was looking at her hands, shaking. Then she crawled over and put her forehead against the deck at my feet. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Target, Zhao. Emotion, eternal loyalty/devotion. Plus 500 AP. And then, the notification I had been waiting for appeared. It was massive, filling my entire field of vision. Total loyalty achieved, 24 subjects. Level up, system level 2. Rewards, plus 1000 AP bonus. Unlock, second island summon. Unlock, advanced construction and metallurgy. Passive income multiplier, x2. Current balance, 1527 AP. I sat up, looking at the girls. They were all there. Some were crying, some were hugging, but they were all looking at me. Not as a guy with a lighter, but as their leader. Even the giants were kneeling, their massive heads bowed in genuine awe of the light magic I had used to purge the shadows. "We lost the lower decks," Sarah said, her voice shaky as she surveyed the damage. "The engines, the storage, it's all gone. We're living on a scrap heap now." I stood up, feeling the new power of level 2 pulsing through the interface. 1,500 points. That was more than I had earned in the entire first week. "We don't need the ship anymore, Sarah," I said, looking out at the ocean. The ship was a cradle. "It's time we grew up." I turned to the group. "Lin, Zhao, get everyone ready. Medics, treat the wounded. We're moving everything to the shore. We're building a real settlement." I walked to the very edge of the broken bow. The second island icon was glowing, pulsing with a golden light. "Li Hong?" Lin walked up behind me. "What are you doing?" "Spending the winnings," I said. I selected the icon. Summon secondary territory, the Fortress Isle. Cost, 1000 AP. Confirm? Confirm. The world didn't just shake this time. It roared. 2 miles off our coast, the ocean didn't just boil, it split open. A massive landmass, twice the size of our current island, tore through the waves. But this wasn't jagged rock and jungle. As the water drained away, we saw it. Perfect, white stone walls. Massive towers. A harbor designed for warships. A literal fortress, pre-built and rising from the depths like a drowned god. But as the dust settled and the new island stabilized, my binoculars picked up something that made my blood run cold. Smoke was rising from the chimneys of the fortress. The serpent flags, the same symbol from the arrow, were already flying from the battlements. System notification, second territory summoned. Warning, island is currently occupied by the Serpent Empire, Vanguard Force, but current objective, conquest or diplomacy. I looked back at my 24 girls. We had scale armor and steel pipes. They had a fortress and, presumably, an army. Well, I muttered, closing the interface. At least we don't have to worry about the shadow crabs anymore. I turned to the girls. Change of plans. We aren't building a settlement. We're preparing for a siege. Total AP, 527, new level, 2, state, war footing. The real strategy game had just begun. I stood on the crumbling bow of the rust bucket, the wind whipping my hair. A week ago, I was a starving man on a roasting deck, calculating how many hours I had left before my kidneys failed. I was worried about a single cup of murky water and a handful of angry women who wanted to throw me overboard. Now, I looked down at the shore. The 3-meter-tall giants were hauling massive slabs of ironback meat into the smokehouses. My heavy lifting squad, led by a silent, focused Zhao, was moving crates of salvaged steel to our new shoreline camp. The engineers were using the new professional tools to forge black, shimmering scale mail vests for every girl. We weren't refugees anymore. We were a tribe. Current status, Li Hong, system level, 2, passive income x2, affection points, AP 527, territory, the first island, 100% control, the fortress isle, occupied by enemy. I opened the system map. The fortress isle sat 2 miles away, glowing with a hostile red aura. I adjusted my binoculars. Through the haze of the ocean, I could see them clearly now. The Serpent Empire wasn't just a name. On the white stone walls of that fortress stood soldiers in green and gold plate armor. They weren't human. Their skin was iridescent, like a snake's, and their eyes were vertical slits. They had heavy ballistas mounted on the towers, massive, bolt-throwing machines that could probably punch a hole through our ship from a mile away. Li Hong. Lin walked up beside me, her scale armor vest clicking softly. She handed me a cup of fresh, desalinated water. The move is almost complete. The ship is a wreck, but Sarah says she can use the remaining hull as a barricade for our land base. But, the girls are scared. They saw the new island. They saw the towers. They should be scared, I said, taking a sip. Fear is a survival instinct. But tell them this, we have something the Serpent Empire doesn't. What's that? We have nothing to lose. And we have a god-tier logistics system. I checked the Advanced Metallurgy tab that unlocked with level 2. New crafting, black powder basics. Cost, 200 AP. New crafting, repeating crossbows, steel string. Cost, 150 AP. If I spent my 527 AP now, I could arm my 24 girls with weapons that would bypass the Serpent's plate armor. I could turn my 3 giants into walking artillery units. Sarah. Zhao. I barked. They ran to the base of the bow, looking up at me. The honeymoon is over, I said, my voice carrying over the camp. The Serpent Empire thinks they've occupied a vacant fortress. They think they're the masters of this sea. They haven't noticed us yet because they think we're just primitives living on a rock. I pointed toward the fortress isle. Tonight, we double the patrols. Tomorrow, we start the advanced development phase. I want every spear tipped with iron backbone. I want the engineers to start practicing with chemical mixtures. If those snakemen want our ocean, they're going to have to pay for it in blood. Target, 24 subjects. Emotion, battle readiness/fanatical resolve. AP generated, plus 120. Total balance, 647 AP. The economy was humming. The tactics were set. The development was accelerating. Suddenly, a horn blast echoed from the fortress isle. It was a long, low, mournful sound that skipped across the waves. I looked through the binoculars. One of the serpent soldiers on the tallest tower was pointing a telescope directly at the rust bucket. He signaled to the crew of a massive ballista. They were turning the machine. They were aiming. "Get down!" I screamed. A 6-foot-long iron bolt whistled through the air, traveling the 2-mile distance with terrifying speed. It slammed into the upper deck of the ship, 3 feet from where I stood, shearing through the rusted steel like it was paper. The entire ship groaned. The girls screamed, diving for cover behind the obsidian walls. I looked at the iron bolt quivering in the deck. It was engraved with the same serpent symbol. I didn't feel fear. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. "Sarah," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Forget the spears. We're going straight to the repeaters. Zhao, get the giants. We're going to need a lot of heavy stones." I looked out at the fortress isle. The soldier was laughing, reloading the ballista for a second shot. "You had the fortress," I whispered, opening the system interface and hovering my finger over the black powder unlock. "But I have the future. Let's see whose walls break first." The iron bolt quivering in the deck was more than a weapon, it was a declaration. The Serpent Empire didn't see us as equals. They saw us as target practice. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the massive projectile. It had bypassed 2 miles of ocean, gravity, and wind to strike with surgical precision. My girls were silent, frozen in the shadows of the rusted containers. The giants had retreated to the base of the obsidian cliffs, their primitive instincts telling them that even their thick skin couldn't stop a bolt that size. "Sarah," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden, heavy silence of the deck. "Gather the engineering team. We're not just building crossbows anymore. We're going to need something that can reach out and touch them back." I opened the system interface. My balance stood at 647 AP. I had been hoarding it for a rainy day, but the storm was already here. Unlock, Advanced Chemistry and Pyrotechnics. Cost, 250 AP. Unlock, Scavenger's Eye, Map Upgrade Resource Detection. Cost, 100 AP. Current balance, 297 AP. The knowledge hit my brain like a physical weight. Formulas for sulfur, charcoal, and saltpeter swirled in my mind. But more importantly, the Scavenger's Eye activated. On my mental map of the island, 3 glowing orange veins appeared on the northern volcanic peaks, the peaks the giants called the Mountains of Smoke. "Sulfur," I whispered. "We have the charcoal from the ironback smokehouses. We can extract saltpeter from the guano in the giants' caves. But the sulfur is up there." I turned to the group. "Change of plans. We aren't just sitting here waiting for the next bolt. If we stay on the shore, they'll pick us off one by one. We're launching an expedition." "To where?" Zhao asked, her hand resting on the hilt of her new scale steel knife. "To the north," I said. "Lin, you're staying here. You have 10 girls and 1 giant to guard the ship. Sarah, you and the engineers are to dismantle the ship's auxiliary diesel tanks, we need the metal for pressure chambers. Zhao, you and the other 10 girls are coming with me. We're going to the peaks. The mountains of smoke are cursed, Firemaker," the giant leader rumbled, stepping toward the ramp. The ground breathes fire. The air turns to acid. No one returns from the high peaks. Then it's a good thing I have medicine magic, I replied, glancing at the medical team. Medics, pack every filter and mask we've made. We're going to climb a volcano. The expedition set out an hour later. It was a grueling trek. The first island wasn't just a flat rock, it was a volcanic spire. As we moved away from the lush, pale jungle of the ironbacks, the ground turned into jagged, glass-like obsidian that shredded the girls' boots. System notification: Subject Zhao is demonstrating leadership trait. Passive AP generation from her squad increased. I watched Zhao. She was at the front of the line, using her spear to test the stability of the ash-covered ground. She didn't complain once. When one of the girls slipped, Zhao was there to catch her. The transformation was complete. The spoiled brat was dead, a lieutenant had been born. As we climbed higher, the air grew thick with the smell of rotten eggs. Yellow crusts of sulfur began to appear in the cracks of the rocks. Stop, I ordered. Masks on. We donned the crude filters the medical team had fashioned from charcoal and cloth. The giants refused to go any further, their massive lungs too sensitive to the fumes. They stayed at the tree line, guarding our retreat. Suddenly, my scavenger's eye began to pulse violently. But it wasn't orange. It was a deep, ancient gold. Li Hong, look! Chen, the biology student, pointed toward a narrow crevice in the mountain face. It wasn't a natural cave. The edges were too straight. The stone had been carved with the same serpent symbols as the bolt back at the ship, but these were ancient, eroded by thousands of years of volcanic ash. This island wasn't created by the system, I realized, touching the cold stone. It was summoned from somewhere else. This is an outpost of the old empire. Should we go in? Zhao asked, her spear leveled at the dark opening. We need the sulfur first, I said, but curiosity was a powerful drug. Wait. Look at the balance. Hidden objective detected, explore the serpent vault. Potential reward, Tier 3 technology/ancient relics. We go in, I decided. But stay sharp. If the system summoned this island, it might have summoned the guards too. We entered the vault. It was a long, sloping tunnel that led deep into the heart of the volcano. The air here was surprisingly clear, kept fresh by an ancient ventilation system that still hummed with a low, magical vibration. After 10 minutes of walking, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, reflecting off thousands of metallic surfaces. It was an armory. But not for humans. Hundreds of suits of green-scale armor hung from the walls, designed for the lithe, slender frames of the serpent men. But in the center of the room sat something that made my heart stop. It was a boat. Not a wooden one. It was a sleek, narrow vessel made of a silver-colored alloy, shaped like a hunting shark. It had no sails, no oars. It's a submersible, I whispered, walking toward it. An ancient serpent scout ship. System check, ancient scout ship the Sea Wraith. Status, offline. Requires 500 AP to reactivate. I checked my balance. 297 AP. Not enough. But the room was also filled with jars of refined sulfur and jars of a strange, glowing blue liquid. Li Hong, these jars. Chen called out. It's not just sulfur. This blue liquid, it reacts to heat. It's like a biological fuel. Pack it all, I ordered. Every jar, every scrap of refined metal. Zhao, help them load the giants' packs. We're not leaving a single gram of this behind. As the girls began to haul the crates, a grinding sound echoed through the chamber. From the shadows at the back of the room, something detached itself from the wall. It was a guardian. A mechanical construct made of bronze and obsidian, shaped like a giant cobra. It was 5 meters long, its eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. Form a circle. I yelled. Spears out. The cobra struck with blinding speed. It slammed into the obsidian floor where I had been standing a second ago, shattering the stone. Zhao lunged forward, her scale-tipped spear striking the construct's neck. The steel held, but the bronze skin of the cobra was too thick. It's armored! Zhao shouted, jumping back as the tail lashed out, narrowly missing her head. I opened the system store. I needed a high-damage solution, now. Purchase, Kinetic Breaker, Single-Use Overload. Cost, 150 AP. Current balance, 147 AP. A small, vibrating device appeared in my hand. It looked like a tuning fork made of dark glass. Zhao. Distract it. I need to get to the base of its skull. On it. Zhao didn't hesitate. She threw her spear, not to kill, but to clang against the cobra's head. As the construct turned its red gaze toward her, I sprinted. I climbed up the jagged rocks of the chamber wall and leaped. I landed on the cobra's cold, metallic back. The vibration of its internal gears felt like a hum of pure power. I slammed the kinetic breaker into the seam where the head met the body and twisted. Whirr pop. A massive pulse of blue energy rippled through the construct. The red light in its eyes flickered and died. The 5-meter bronze snake slumped to the floor, motionless. The girls stood in silence, their breath ragged in the cold air. Is it dead? Chen asked. For now, I said, sliding off the construct. But we just triggered an alarm. Look. At the back of the chamber, a series of lights were flickering to life. A holographic map of the archipelago projected into the air. It showed our island, the Fortress Isle, and dozens of other islands, all marked with the serpent symbol. But one island, far to the north, was glowing with a white light. New objective, the origin source. Location, the Grand Temple of the Serpent King. This isn't just about surviving a boat wreck anymore, I said, looking at the map. The Serpent Empire is waking up. These islands, they are all connecting. If we don't take that fortress, they will use these vaults to wipe us out. Then we take the fortress, Zhao said, her voice filled with a new, dark confidence. She picked up a piece of the broken construct, a long, sharp blade of obsidian. We have the sulfur. We have the blue fuel. Let's go home and make some fire. The trek back down the mountain was faster, fueled by adrenaline and the weight of our loot. By the time we reached the tree line, the sun was setting, painting the ocean in shades of blood and gold. When we reached the rust bucket, Lin ran to meet us. Her face was grim. They fired again, she said, pointing to the ship. 2 more bolts were embedded in the hull. One had completely destroyed the kitchen area. The ship was tilting further. They're ranging their shots, Sarah said, joining us. They'll hit the main fuel tanks by tomorrow. If that happens, the whole ship goes up. They won't get it tomorrow, I said. Sarah, how long to mix the powder? With the refined sulfur you brought? 4 hours. But what are we firing it from? We don't have cannons. I looked at the jars of blue liquid we had stolen from the vault. We don't need cannons. We have the giants. And we have the ship's auxiliary pipes. The night was a fevered dream of industry. The engineers, fueled by the professional toolset and the new blueprints, converted the ship's heavy steel pipes into mortar tubes. We didn't have sophisticated aiming systems, but we had something better, the giants. I stood on the shore as the 3-meter titans practiced holding the steel tubes. They were strong enough to act as living gun carriages, absorbing the recoil that would have shattered a human's ribs. We spent the night mixing the blue powder, a volatile combination of the ancient serpent fuel and our own black powder. It burned with a terrifying, white-hot intensity. System notification, new invention, serpent fire mortars. Tactical advantage, plus 200% siege damage. By 4 a.m., we were ready. I stood on the beach, looking at the fortress isle. The serpent soldiers were confident. They hadn't seen us move in the dark. They thought we were still huddling in the ruins of our ship. Li Hong, Lin whispered, standing beside me. She was holding a repeating crossbow, its steel string taut. Are we really doing this? 24 of us against a fortress? We aren't just 24, I said, looking at the 3 giants standing behind us, each holding a 12-foot steel mortar tube. We are the first new power in this ocean. And it's time we introduced ourselves. I raised my hand. Giants. Aim for the towers. Sarah, Zhao, prepare the boarding rafts. The giants tilted the tubes. They didn't need a math degree, they had been throwing boulders their whole lives. They knew trajectory. Fire. The night exploded. 3 streaks of white-blue flame roared out of the mortar tubes, lighting up the entire coastline. The recoil sent the giants stumbling back a step, but they held. The projectiles, heavy iron canisters filled with blue powder and obsidian shards, arched over the 2 miles of ocean. On the fortress isle, the serpent soldiers barely had time to look up. Boom! 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 The top of the main ballista tower didn't just break, it evaporated. A cloud of white fire engulfed the battlements. The screaming of the serpent men drifted across the water, thin and high-pitched. Again! I roared. Another volley. This time, we hit the gatehouse. The massive white stone walls, thought to be impregnable, cracked under the heat of the blue powder. Now! Launch the rafts! We had built 3 large rafts from the ship's remaining timber, powered by simple hand-cranked propellers the engineers had rigged up. 10 girls to a raft, with the giants swimming alongside, acting as tugboats. We crossed the 2 miles under the cover of the smoke and chaos. The Serpent Empire was in total disarray. They had never seen artillery. They had never seen fire that burned on stone. As our rafts hit the white stone docks of the fortress, I jumped off, my scale steel sword in hand. Clear the docks. Medics, stay in the center. Crossbows, target the battlements. The battle was a blur of steel and fire. The serpent men were fast, their rapiers flashing in the moonlight, but they were used to fighting other primitive tribes. They weren't prepared for a squad of women moving in a tactical phalanx, protected by black scale armor that turned their blades aside. Zhao was a whirlwind. She moved through the serpent guards like a shadow, her obsidian blade finding the gaps in their green plate armor. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, the serpent flag had been torn down. I stood in the center of the fortress courtyard, surrounded by my 24 girls and the 3 exhausted giants. The serpent vanguard had been driven back into the sea or captured. Conquest complete, the white stone fortress. New territory acquired. Population increased, plus 30 serpent prisoners, labor force. System reward, plus 2,000 AP. Total balance, 2,147 AP. I walked up to the highest tower. From here, I could see the entire archipelago. It wasn't just a few islands. There were hundreds of them, stretching out into the mist. And in the far distance, I could see the glow of other fires. Other summoned leaders? Other empires? Lin joined me, looking out at the new world we had just claimed. We did it, she whispered. We have a fortress. We have food. We have a future. We have a start, I corrected her. I opened the system interface. With 2,000 points, I could finally unlock the ancient scout ship back in the volcano. I could build a fleet. I could explore the origin source. But as I looked at the map, a new icon appeared. It was a blinking green, far to the east. It was moving toward us. Warning, unknown signal detected. Transmission, is anyone else out here? This is the cruise ship Majestic. We have 1,200 passengers and we're taking on water. Please, help us. I looked at Zhao, then at Sarah, then at the smoking ruins of our old cargo ship. 1,200 people. A cruise ship. If they arrived, my 24-girl system would be crushed by the sheer weight of their needs. Or, they could be the army I needed to conquer the entire ocean. Li Hong? Zhao asked, noticing my expression. What is it? The world just got a lot bigger, I said, a grim smile spreading across my face. Sarah, forget the mortars. Start building a shipyard. We're going on a rescue mission. I looked out at the rising sun. We had started as a puddle in a desert, a wreck on a rock. Now, we were the masters of a fortress, and the horizon was calling. The strategy was simple: expand, survive, conquer. And I had 2,147 points to spend. Current AP, 2,147, territory, level 2 fortress, army, 24 elite units, 3 giants, 1 scout ship, pending, next objective, the cruise ship crisis.